Okay, we are continuing in Kuf Yud Gimel, Halacha test. Halacha was about, just to get back into it, the Mechaber had said, if someone who's not Jewish cooks a food, Kamacha ben Drusoi, that food is Bishul. Everyone agrees on that. The Mechaber said once it becomes Bishul, there's nothing you could do to make it back to the Bishul Yisroel. The Rama was Mako. Rama said, yes, you still can, this Yid can still cook it and make a Bishul Yisroel. And the Mechaber had said to be Samach that only an Erev Shabbos or Hefzim Meruba, but the Mechaber basically is Machmir, and the Rama was Mako about that child. Okay. Now, this question here is that within the Shita of the Rama that a person could be Mako, that you could cook it even later. We saw that we mentioned this time that the Ra'ah, who's the Mako, that's the Rishon which the Shita comes from, who explains the Shita, says that it's mutter, the Yid can cook as long as it's still Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo, which means is, not only can the Yid cook while the food is, before the food finishes cooking, but even if the food is completely finished cooking, and now you're cooking more to add to it, you're cooking more to make the food taste even better than that, something you can do, I'll give you an example later, but even if you're cooking food that will add to it later on, that's still a time that the Yid can participate. Okay? And that's what the Ra'ah says. Do you have a question? No. Okay. Now, the Gilui Marsha, right here on the page, brings from a sefer called Kashrus, which I don't have, who says like this. It says, Tzarech oid, you can only be making if it's Tzarech oid ligmar bishul. Okay, it's on the bottom of the page. Okay, now, I don't have the sefer, but the Darkei Tshuva understands this to be saying, that's what he brings it down. He means like this. If the Gilui Marsha is arguing on this point, if the food is fully cooked, then it's too late for the Yid to help, even though it might still be Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo. He doesn't say anything about that, and I don't have to say for to look at it to really know what it says, but the Darkei Tshuva seems to have understood that that's what he means, that this Tshuva's Chinuch Beis Yehud is only be Meko in cases if the Yid did cooking before it finished. If the cooking is finished and the Yid would just be Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo, just making it taste better, do something beyond the full cooking, that he holds would not be enough. Okay, and because now the Darkei Tshuva himself brings that many others argue, including the Ra'ah. He brings the Ra'ah, argues on that. The Ra'ah is really the makor for this thing, that they argue on that thing. But because of these kind of questions, the Uyus Poskim l'chachil do not want to rely on the Yid finishing with the cooking. Okay? They don't really want to rely on that because in a case where the cooking is finished, all done, and you'll hear the case in a second when it's completely done. Okay, but on the other hand, what Maisa is this halacha that we talked about here. We're in Kuf Yud Gimel now, was also in Kuf Yud Beis. We talked about it back over there a little bit. Kuf Yud Beis, Halacha Yud Beis. And over there, there's a long Chalkas B'Yam about it, who brings a whole pile of Rishonim and Achronim who are Meko, like the Ra'ah says. Even if it's Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo, the Yid can still help in the cooking. And he thinks that's the consensus of the poskim that you could be Meko. And he brings of the contemporary poskim, or the more modern poskim, in Reb Chaim Ozer, Nachiezer, and the Shevet HaLevi, both are Meko about it. And as long as it's still Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo, the Yid can still participate. And that sure seems to be correct. Aside from this one line over here, and a few, Makaras that the Chalkas B'Yam brings, everybody else seems to say that as long as the Yid is still doing something to make the food better, that's good enough. Okay? Even though the food is fully cooked, the guy completely cooked it, it was fully edible, but the Yid is still adding to it, that's good enough. Okay? What's an application of it? I'm going to tell you one now, we'll do one in a little while, is the small peeled canned potatoes. Okay, the tiny, this like this size potatoes, they taste good. Okay, but and they're fully cooked. Coming out of the can, they're fully 100% cooked. But those potatoes are rarely eaten as is. People don't just take them out of the can and eat them as is. They use them to make other dishes. Okay, they'll put some oil onto them and some spices and brown them in the oven. Okay, they'll slice them up and put them under a piece of meat and cook them together with that. And if they do something else to add, they do more cooking to add to the taste of the food. When you brown those potatoes, you're cooking it more and you're changing the taste of the food. It's not just a plain potato. Now you've used it to make something else. So if that was the way you were using it, then you would say, according to the Ra'ah, according to what seems to be the simple thing, you would say the person the Yid is going to finish off the cooking at home. So then you could give Hashlachas on that product. That saying is, this food is leaving the company as Bishul, because it's fully cooked by the guy. But the Yid who's going to take it at home, or the restaurant that's going to use it with the Mashgiach, is going to make it Bishul Yisrael. Okay, so you're gonna count on the fact that the Yid taking it home was gonna finish it off, because even though it left the factory fully cooked, it's 100% edible. It's still the Yid's gonna make it Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo, and that would be good enough.
So a person should not eat it out of the can.
So we're going to talk about that in a second. There's a very big. I said in theory you should be allowed to give Hashlachas on that. I don't think it's a good idea. I know we're going to talk about that in a little while. Okay, there's a very serious other issues to it, like you said, eating it out of the can. Right. Okay. Now, I'm not saying people are doing that. I'm trying to give you an example of a kind of food that this then applies to. I mean, I'm not saying that you should
theoretically, if that was true,
then you should not. Yeah, that would be good. Then you would not be allowed to eat out of the can. Right. Correct. We'll talk about exactly that point in a second. Okay. Now, what we're talking about here is a food that's Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo. That by cooking it,
You said the English room.
You're looking at the email. I said that's it. So the.
I can't wait for you. Don't say wait. What's that expensive there?
I don't know. So the
1 to 1, I think.
1 to 1.
So the. God, wait a second. Catch up. We're finishing off a point that there's the Kashrus is that when we say that the Yid can finish off the cooking and that's good enough, that means even if the guy did the entire cooking, made the food completely edible, and all the Yid is doing is what we call Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo. He's making it better after it's finished cooking. And the example we were just talking about was you have these small canned potatoes, peeled potatoes, they're fully cooked coming out of the can. The Yid, well then, if the Yid would take it and go brown it, they put oil and spices on it, stick it into the oven, and it makes it taste completely different. Adding to the taste of that food, that most people hold that's Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo is still enough for the Yid to help out. Ramah said you could help even after it's and the Pasha says that's what we're talking about. That it's even if it's going to make it, even if it was fully cooked, you can still make it Bishul so if it's still Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo.
Most places don't like it.
You missed it. You listened to the thing.
So how do you say last week that most places don't like it?
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So now this that we're talking about being Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo is only talking about that even if you make that Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo is only assuming that the person actually did more cooking to the food. Okay, but it's obvious. Okay, it's obvious that if the person's not cooking anymore, and all he's doing now is warming the food up, then that's nothing. Okay, the fact that he says, "Well, it was cold and I made it hot," that's obviously nothing. The Rajma, when he's even arguing on this Ra'ah, at one point he says is, according to what you're saying, whatever certain logic that he's arguing, says, according to the logic you would say, I could say that it would be mutter even if it was past Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo. In other words, and obviously that doesn't help anything. Obviously you can't help if you're just warming up the food. And that's negaya to, there's a practical case of that, which is instant rice. Okay, which instant rice, but Derech Klal is rice that's 100% fully cooked, and the person at home, all they're doing is just warming it up. Okay, all the person is doing is, the instructions say, cook it for a few minutes. All you're doing is making it moist and making it warmer, all of which can be accomplished without hot water. All of which can be accomplished just by putting it into warm water. So that says to you that what you're doing is not cooking. What you're adding to this thing is not cooking. You're adding moisture and warmth. That's not adding cooking to this thing.
Well,
okay?
you'd have to put spices in it.
What do you say?
You'd have to put spices.
You could put spices into it also. So, but it doesn't
No,
add
I
more
would say
cooking.
that would bring it back to where you're cooking it as opposed to just heating it up.
I'm spicing it also is just a matter of putting the spices onto it. But the question is, you'd have to do something to make it taste better because of that.
I say put spices.
So those raw potatoes.
Spices. Hold on a second. Spicing it again. You have to do something through cooking that makes it taste better. Say the Jew participated in the cooking. You have to do something. Just by putting salt and pepper on, it's not gonna.
If you put margarine or salt and pepper on it, you're changing the whole taste. It's no longer just.
But if you put margarine and salt and pepper, you haven't cooked
if you
it.
put margarine or salt and pepper in the water when you're cooking it, that doesn't change it to me that it's a different. It's actually a different min. It's white rice and now it's a flavored dish.
Right. So you're correct that it's now flavored, but that you have to add cooking to the food. You've added spices to the food. The Jew has to participate in the cooking. The fact that he put on the spices is not enough. He has to do something in the cooking of the food. By putting on some salt, I didn't do it. I just put on salt. I have to do something in the cooking shaboy to make it taste better. In the case of the potatoes, the person, it's not just that it has sprinkled oil on top of it. The fact that it cooked in that oil, browned it and made it taste better.
But, even though they're
They are fully cooked, but
You're saying, let's say you just add salt and pepper to these potatoes and you put them in the oven. So basically, just heating it
then
up.
nothing. Right? Then you're just heating it up. But that's not what you do with them. What you do is you're so to speak frying them to make them give a whole.
We don't add oil.
Like change color.
I'm saying, okay, fine. We make them just add spices
That's what
and
you say. What can I tell you? So you need to trade for it.
Okay,
So
fine.
you're eating Hashlachas. What can I tell you?
that's what I wanted to know.
Okay, we'll get to that in a second. Okay, sit down. So, but I'm not saying that every instant rice is that, but I've tried out instant rices and put it into warm water and just let it steep in warm water for a while, and it's fully cooked. It's fully ready to eat. So, which is to say that and the same thing that people say to you when they taste it in the factory. They scoop it off the line and it's fully cooked, which it really is. That's the idea, is that it's fully cooked. Okay, so in that case, the person is not eating. So even if you say that you could just be Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo, here you're not even doing that. Okay. Next, another Shabbos. The Ramah says the Yid can participate even at the end of the cooking. The simple understanding is, if you just read the Din Shulchan Aruch, you would say that means he could participate however he wants to. There's no restrictions on that. Okay. Rabbi Kvega brings over here that the preacher says, right on our bed, the preacher says, this that we say, that the Yid can participate later on, after it's Kamach ben Drusoy, after it's already passably edible, he can only participate if he does something that really contributes to make the food taste good, contributes to the cooking of the food, to the cooking of the food. If the Yid, all he does is Hashlachas kisem, all he does is one of the hecker kind of things, the things that help for Bishul Yisroel but are not part of the cooking, that's not good enough at this point. Okay, he doesn't say what the svara is, but the logic, seemingly he's saying, is that in order to make something Bishul Yisroel that's raw and need a little hecker counts, it's easy to do that. But once it's already Bishul Akum, it's already been made Bishul Akum, it's already cooked by the guy to the point that it's edible, now to change it from Bishul Akum to Bishul Yisroel, somehow you have to do more.
The Hashlachas kisem only good before it's third cooked.
Correct. So that's what the preacher says, the preacher brings it, that Hashlachas kisem only works.
That's Hipuch Ba'ama means?
What?
Hipuch Ba'ama.
Right, Hipuch Ba'ama is the preacher's word, but Hipuch Ba'ama means to say is things that don't really help for the cooking, they're just for a hecker.
Why is Hipuch, using what he said, why is that not contributing to the cooking?
It's because Hipuch Ba'ama is a lashon from before. It means you moved it over without taking it off the fire. Yeah, that's what he's talking about. But the earlier dinner where people weren't so happy. Okay, now the lamaisa is that it's hard to justify this because the one of the riots that the Rishonim brought to be makel. Well, how did they know that they should be makel about this thing? You can cook all the way to the end. It's because they said, the Gemara says, if you cook it, bein b'tchila, bein b'soif, and they had diyukim in the Gemara, that it means is, just like you can cook in the beginning, so too you can cook in the end. There's no difference between cooking at this time or that time. And all this diyukim like that in the Gemara, that the cooking can happen at any time that you can cook. Whenever he wants to, that makes it Bishul Yisroel. What is that saying? That saying is that no matter what, it's all equal. There aren't differences between cooking at this time and cooking at that time. Okay. Now, in the Gemara, you could argue and say, this din of Hashlachas kisem is really not Midin HaGemara. Okay. So we trying to make it later up. So maybe in the Midin HaGemara, everything is equal, but the din later on, the Hashlachas kisem kind of thing is not as good. But you're looking at the poskim, aside from the Prisha, I mean, who's a serious question, aside from the Prisha, no one else says that. The Shulchan Aruch doesn't say that. The Shulchan Aruch says, this is how you make Bishul, so all kinds of rules, and now, halacha test, and you should know, we have a machotas. Do you have to do it at this point or at that point? No, the simple reading here is that the rules of how you make Bishul Yisroel don't change for this case. It's just a detail. You can do it, the Mechaber holds you can only do it at the beginning, and the Ramah holds you can do it even at the end. But whether you can do Hashlachas kisem, Pashas, you can do it even later also. Okay, and you don't know this, but the Prisha, when he says his din, he doesn't just say that in the blue. He says, the Beis Yosef argues on what I just said. The Beis Yosef holds you can do whatever you want to. And I hold that you can only do a full cooking later on. Okay, so the preacher himself is not, he can't, if you look at the preacher just brought him, you see it just as a statement, but he says is, you should know, the Beis Yosef holds you can do whatever you want to, and I hold you should do not like that. And we saw also earlier, when we learned Kufya Beis, the Minchas Yaakov over there, Chok Yaakov brings, pretty straightforward, pretty clear that you can do even Hashlachas kisem, and it's my impression that most places cannot make it like this. Not like this preacher. I mean, it's brought here on page, but most places will not make it like the Yid can help in the late cooking no matter what.
What's the difference if the preacher acknowledges the Beis Yosef's shita?
That is to say is that he's saying is the everyone until me said that the din is you can do whatever you want to. And I'm coming up with like a chiddush to say this. He's not like interpreting that that's what it's always been like that. He's like saying to you, you should just know that here's a new shita like this. He's not saying that's what was always
We
been.
can say argument, or
What?
We can say argument.
Yeah, that doesn't make it. That's just to say is that if you're trying to say is what was the assumption, if you just read this one line and say, oh, he's explaining the din, and that's really what everyone holds. It's not really what everyone holds. The Shulchan Aruch himself, the Beis Yosef, holds not like that. And which is, you get that from reading it also. If the Shulchan Aruch, if the Ramah held it's only mutter in a certain case, it's only mutter in certain kinds of business, should tell you, and those things that we said a few halachas ago don't apply here or something. Okay. So now to some practical applications. I mentioned...
I think what you just said just confused me.
Okay, I'm sorry.
You're saying that the Beis Yosef holds, and then we just said the Ramah says.
Right. I was mixing those together. I'm sorry. I mixed those together. He says the Beis Yosef, in explaining the lenient opinion, says you could do even Hashlachas kisem. You can do whatever you want. And that reflects what everyone just assumed, that the lenient opinion holds you can do any kind of participation you want. And I'm seeing that also the same idea in the Ramah. The Ramah, who actually is Mekel, why doesn't he say, V'yesh matir b'chol inyan, but you should know, if you want to be Mekel, don't do Hashlachas kisem. Why doesn't he tell you that? Because he assumes that you can do whatever you want to. All the types of ways to make Bishul Yisroel that were said on the page beforehand apply over here also. There's no restriction.
What is the, I'm somewhere I'm lost. What is the whatever you want to?
You could do, let's say you want to do Hashlachas kisem. You don't want to really be part of the cooking. You want to just do what we call a hecker, just some sign of, make a mark of the fact that a Jew is here. That's what you're doing. So, is that good enough? The Ramah doesn't tell you it's not good enough. Why doesn't he say to you that you should know those coolers that I told you before don't apply?
So then what I said before with the example with the rice.
No, so that's still not the same. Spicing is not yet, it had nothing to do with the cooking. Throwing a toothpick into the fire, that's at least something to do with the cooking. That's within the cooking process, you did something. Okay. So now, we mentioned one application of the Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo with these little potatoes, and another one, now I know why I decided to put this over here, and I'm waiting for Dove to come, which is, if you have blintzes, okay, and the shell of the blintz is made on what they call a blintz wheel, okay, which just cooks the shell. It cooks like with dry heat, cooks the shell, and the blintz can often come out of the factory 100% cooked, okay? And assuming that it's oil shulchan malachim, and assuming a bunch of other things, you'd say it was cooked by the guy, it would be Bishul. But if every person who takes it home is going to go fry it, okay, it comes out looking like an albino. I mean, the thing is it doesn't look like a blend. It has no color to it. It's very sad looking. So but every person who's going to take it home is going to take it and fry it. So then you would say is the Yid, that's another example of Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo. The Yid is taking the fully cooked food and doing cooking that makes it even taste better. So then if Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo is enough to make it Bishul Yisroel, that would be another case where you'd say is maybe I don't have to make it Bishul Yisroel in the factory, because the Yid, when he gets home, will finish the cooking and make it Bishul Yisroel.
So what about the guy who's into the microwave?
I'm getting to that. I'm getting right to the second. What?
Is that what we're actually saying?
No. It's Bishul Yisroel. No, that's Bishul. Okay. Now, and now some examples. I just want to give you some examples of the din. Not of the Mitztamek V'yafeh Lo. In cases where it's not fully cooked, I have 4 examples here. One is parboiled rice. I had said to you before about instant rice, which is usually the rice that's fully cooked. Parboiled rice is partially boiled, okay, partially cooked. There, the guy made it to the point that it's ma'achal ben shoshay. It's passably edible if you just warm it up. But the Yid's going to finish off the cooking, and you could say that the Yid finishing off the cooking will make it Bishul Yisroel. That's one example. There's something called potato dices, okay, which are diced up pieces of potatoes. They're cooked in water. They're cooked not in steam. They're cooked in water, and they are sometimes, or oftentimes, ma'achal ben shoshay. They leave the factory passably edible. And what you're supposed to do with them, then they dry out a little bit. What you do is you use them to make dishes with potatoes in them. Okay, you take them home, it's really like food service. You take them and you make something with potatoes out of it. So there also, it would be leaving the factory Bishul, and you would then be finished, potentially, if you made it Bishul, then you would cook it at home or in your company and make it Bishul Yisroel. In other cases, similar to the parboiled rice, is par-baked bread, okay, which is kishmoy kedu. It's partially baked bread. Okay, they use it in lots of bakeries that have no bakery to them want to use that. 2 local bakeries that I can think of here. They're not real bakeries. They just want to have what appears to be a bakery. What they do is they take this stuff that's basically cooked in the factory, and they stick it into the oven, and then they have fresh bread, even though they have no flour and water. There's no yeast in the place. They can't make bread. But they're taking this stuff, and every day they can give you fresh bread because they take bread that's partially been baked in the company, and then they just take it out of the freezer and stick it into the oven and cook it, do the end of the cooking. Okay, so that could be in that case pasta. So by the Yid finishing with the cooking. And lastly is frozen potato latkes are also, if my understanding is correct, mostly cooked in the company to the point that they're passably edible. And there, also you could say is that the Yid who finishes off the cooking in his house would make it Bishul salt if it needed Bishul salt.
The car baked, where I work, we use it. And I was told that it's completely cooked.
Okay, so
and that all you have to do is just bring it up to room temperature and just start chopping away in your bag.
so I can't vouch for every single one. Okay, in one of the places locally that's a seriously place that wanted to be pasta roll, we tested it. We took it out of the freezer and left it on the counter just to see what happened to it. Not only was it not edible, but when we came back the next day, it had started rising. Okay, that's how not baked it was. That the next day, the thing had risen out of the bag and went from being this size to being this size. So I'm not saying that every one of them was like that. Maybe yours is different. The one that was on we heard the same question about it. We sell it as pasta roll because the Yid does the end of the cooking. So
they sell hard-baked breads at the Jewel.
That's how much.
I know, and I call Tui, I'm not sure, but I call Tui they have. Those aren't frozen, so those are in a package. So those might be edible. It depends. It might depend.
So I'm not saying everywhere. I'm not saying everything. In another place that was under our Hashlachas and was being sold as pasta, so we tested it just to be sure that theirs, in fact, was not fully cooked. So maybe yours are. Okay. Now, knowing all of this, and we've heard all these things, so you're about. I'm going to hear what you've all been rumbling about, which is you could therefore make a case to say, and others have said this, is that since the Ramah says you can make it Bishul Yisroel by the Yid finishing off the cooking, and all these foods, Pop will try it. Everyone's going to cook it at home. So if a Jewish person is going to buy it, he'll do the cooking in his house. He's going to go to a restaurant. They have a mashgiach, making sure that it's Bishul Yisroel. And therefore, the end of the cooking will make it Bishul Yisroel. So it leaves the factory treif. I know it sounds funny. It leaves the factory treif, but when it gets home, you're going to cook it, and it will be Bishul Yisroel by the time you cook it. Okay? So you could justify such a shita. Now, the very serious problem is that's you're taking a huge chance when you say that, because there are plenty of situations where a person will use that food without doing what you think he's going to do with it. Okay, the one is a person who's in a rush. Okay, this case of the blintzes that me and Doug know about. The case of the blintzes, there are people. The company tells there are people who take it out of the freezer, stick it in the microwave, warm it up, and eat it. Okay, they don't do the final cooking. The guy's in a rush. Okay, he needs for whatever reason. He takes canned potatoes. Okay, and he decides to not eat it like that. He's hungry and he just eats them out of the can, or he just pours some salt and pepper on it and eats it. Sticks it in the microwave and eats it. Or you have companies who use these things not in the way that you think they're going to. You think that people use diced potatoes to make hash browns in their breakfast restaurant. That might not be. The company, I went to a company that was using these diced potatoes to make vodka. It was just a convenient source of potatoes for them. Other companies use it to make canned soup. And so that the mashgiach in the soup company, what does he know? He sees a bag comes in that says, it has hashkach on it, says it's kosher, so he dumps it into the soup. He says, no, we don't need Bishul Yisroel in our soup. The soup, for other reasons, didn't need Bishul Yisroel. So he says, the potatoes are kosher, they have hashkach on them. The rest of the things in the soup don't need Bishul Yisroel. Fine, no Bishul Yisroel.
It's cooked in the soup.
What?
Didn't they get cooked? I mean, it's cooked by the company.
And then it's cooked by the company. In a house, the assumption is that in a house, if there's cooking being done in your house, I'm not saying everyone does this, but the typical setup is they tell the guy, you can't cook anything. All fires have to live by you. That's a standard way to set it up. They don't say, this you can cook, this you can't cook. But it could happen, not like that. But in a company, the guy's making vegetable soup, and it doesn't need Bishul. He says, no need for Bishul Yisroel. I have potatoes. The potatoes have hashkach on them. What do I have to think about it? The potatoes, everything else doesn't need Bishul Yisroel.
So, I mean, it's a different issue, which you could say is not an issue. So now, the guy, you want to buy kosher.
Yes.
If he buys it and uses it, you're defrauding him.
So that's actually good to see, because it's good for him to eat Bishul, because then he'll want to marry a guy. That's good. We should want him to marry a guy. If he wants to do it, he's defrauding him. We're not defrauding him.
You are. He wants to buy kosher. He wants to eat kosher.
For his needs, he's buying kosher. For his needs. But
no, China, you can't sell treif meat to a guy thinking that it's kosher.
No. But Someone who
Not
eats,
even
If it's a rabbi, I think it might be a rabbi that a guy is kind of eating kosher.
someone who eats, okay, maybe there's some people like that. Most of the guys who want kosher have certain things in mind. I'm not taking away from them. We want to serve, give them what they want. Most of their needs are they don't want animal products, they don't want dairy, they don't want it to be dangerous, they want to help the world. Whatever they want to do, but they don't want to prevent it. They don't stop them.
You can't say what's an event to guy telling you that it's kosher.
I'm not talking, but it is kosher. All the things that the guy wants from the kashrus of it, we're giving him.
He's saying that this is how long you're going to take care of.
He's not master, but he's asking for kosher. No, Mexican wants no animal products. They don't want animal products. So we're giving, he doesn't want no bishul. I'm telling you, it's good for bishul. It's that we should encourage him to marry a guy. That's what we should do. That's a good idea.
In all seriousness, if you sell a kosher product, and a fry yid comes in, and he buys it,
Yes.
and he turns it on and cooks it, he's eating kosher. I mean, he's a
Yeah,
fry
yeah.
yid, whatever.
Yes. We want him to eat kosher also.
Okay. What happens in this case, these guys are talking about, that a goy buys it, and he buys it in the intention that he's got a friend that's Jewish.
Oh, so that's a good point. He says, what happens if a guy buys it for his Jewish friend? He buys it for the guy sitting next to him in the office. Says, I'm going to buy you lunch, buy you this thing, and I'll warm it up for you. I'll cook it in front of you. I put you a kosher product, and I'll warm it up for you. Okay, so it might be there are cases like that, but usually, I'm not saying this is always true, that usually it's assumed that a yid knows he should only let a guy cook for him if he likes fire somebody. But he might not. You're right. Maybe like with a friend, he might not. Right, you're right. So you give me another example, is that this situation is very dangerous. You're giving hashgacha on something that's leaving your company treif. That's what it is. It's leaving the company treif, and you're counting on what 95% of the people will use it in a way that's kosher. But there's 5% of the people who are going to end up eating a treif. So that's a lot of people. You're giving hashgacha on something that's really treif today. And in 95% of the cases, it's going to be okay. It won't be so bad. But there are going to still be 5% of the cases that are not going to be. Okay, I've told you, for sure at least, about someone very prominent who was talking about this shayla, and was sitting there and munching on these foods, on one of these foods. Okay, they were just munching on it. It was a crunchy food. It wasn't fully cooked. They were just munching on it. It tastes like a cruncher potato chip. It's very hard and crunchy, and they were enjoying the taste, not realizing that they were eating bishul. Okay, this is a very prominent person who very careful about kashrus. They didn't know, so I'm saying I'm saying talking to the person about how maybe we should make this food bishul Yisroel, and they're eating bishul because, and it has hashgacha on it. Okay, it has hashgacha on it because. So again, there's all kinds of funny situations so if 1 out of 100 people are going to end up eating it as bishul, so something seems wrong about giving hashgacha like that. Okay. Okay. So if that would be right, we would be limiting the Ramah to the case that, so to speak, that the Ramah is talking about, which is the Ramah's case is again to a certain thing, which is a person comes into their house and there was someone not Jewish cooking in the house. Or they come into their restaurant and the guy started cooking. And they catch the food when it's halfway cooked. The food is almost cooked. Is there a way to save this food? So the Rambam says yes. If the yid will finish off the cooking, he can make a bishul Yisroel. So it's the cases when it happens. They walked in, the guy lit the fires already. What do we do now? No, if the yid finishes off the cooking, that would be good enough. That was the Rambam. But to use it to justify giving hashgacha on the food, on your canned potatoes, it's hard to understand. He could open up the can and just put on salt and pepper and eat the food without making it bishul Yisroel. So really, therefore, it should have bishul Yisroel, not because theoretically you could not make it bishul Yisroel, but seemingly it makes sense to make it bishul Yisroel to make sure you're covering all you consume. Now,
to be another issue, if somebody's so if you cook it in a pot, so even though the bleed is going into the pot, or they're going in before it's fully cooked, but obviously it gets cooked in the pot, so the bleed is going to mutter just as well.
yeah.
Right, but let's say these guys are putting a can or something, he's cutting it with a knife or something before he puts it into this pot, and he uses different dishes while it's still not fully cooked. He just puts it in the dishwasher, so you can schmear on that knife. It's straight.
You're saying in the meantime it was trade, and it might have been used in a way on his kalim. It may be floating around the house. Which was, that's interesting point. Okay, that's worth thinking about also. Then that we're letting him keep trade in his house, but it'll go to the dishwasher, or go into his sink, it'll go into everything else.
So in that pot that it was cooked, obviously it's not going to be a problem.
Right. Okay, that's a good point. Okay, and this is like when I say it's like a side point. It's whatever. It's a side point, which is all that we just said. All this whole kula is for Ashkenazim. Right? The Ramah is Meko. The Mechaber is not Meko. So if someone were to give hashgacha, and they would be justified to do that, if we say an Ashkenazi hashgacha would give hashgacha on, let's say, parboiled rice, and say this rice is kosher because the yid's going to finish the cooking. They've decided that no, everyone's going to cook it in the end. That's good enough. that would only be good for their Ashkenazi customers. The Sephardi customers would have to be aware before they buy the rice, says, are you giving Hashlachas because you think I'm going to finish off the cooking? If that's what you're doing, that doesn't help for me. Me, the Sephardi, it wouldn't help for. So if the Hashgacha would do that and say, I'm giving Hashgacha because I know you're going to finish off the cooking, then Sephardim wouldn't buy it. Then that food really, not the Ashkenazim are doing the right thing. They're giving Hashgacha for Ashkenazim, but the people, Sephardim who are wanting to buy that food would have to be aware, the Rav and the Sephardi Shul would have to be aware, don't tell people, don't buy this and this and this, because that Hashgacha is doing something that works for them, but it's not good enough for us.
The obvious opposite would be kidneys and Pesach.
That there are foods that they can eat. But over here, it's misleading because it says on the hashgacha on it, the person thinks kosher is kosher. That should be good enough for me. Here's an example that the hashgacha did the right thing, but for me, it's not kosher. They did the right thing because they're Ashkenazi. Me being a Sephardi, I have to start asking questions to find out whether that food is good enough.
Until recently, in the last few years, a lot of these things that were kidneys didn't have any. It didn't even say it was kidneys.
Right. Correct.
So I mean, this
So that was the opposite. That was a Sephardi giving the hashgacha,
Right.
and we were being misled. We, the Ashkenazim, we said, okay, fine. Okay, now, one last thing, we'll just do this quickly, which is that Daki Tshuva brings a sort of well-known tshuva from the Beis Yosef, which is Aruch, who says, what happens if you have a guy who cooked the food, and he's talking about grains, and then after he cooked it, you undid the cooking. Okay? He talks about drying it in a way that undoes the cooking to the point that it's not edible anymore. So he says that there's reason to think, he's not 100% convinced, but he said there's reason to think that if the Yid would now cook it the second time, that would be Bishul Yisroel. Why? The guy did a cooking, he made it Bishul Akum, but what the guy did was undone. It became uncooked. If it became uncooked, now cooking it again can make it Bishul Yisroel. Even though the Mechaber would say that if a Yid cooked it, the guy can't cook it at the end of the cooking, but if the guy's work was undone, the Yid can't do the cooking. Okay? This is not such a relevant child to us. But there are two variations of the child that are relevant to us. One is the Dr. Tshuva brings, what would happen in the opposite case? What would happen if the Yid would do the cooking and make the food Bishul Yisroel, and then the Yid's action would be undone? So he says the same logic should be, then it's not Bishul Yisroel. Okay. If the Yid did the cooking and made it get undone, then the guy cooking later would be Bishul Akum. Okay, I don't know if that either is a practical case, but there is the Hashlachas Binyamin at the beginning of the Siman. We mentioned this then. At the beginning of the Siman has a practical application, which is like this. What happens if you have a food? His example is beans. Okay, the person can talk about whether beans need Bishul Yisroel. So he says, tell me. He says beans are really edible raw. Okay, when you take beans out of the ground, they're edible. He says, so why are people talking about whether beans need Bishul Yisroel? He says, because obviously they're talking about the standard way that we get beans, which is dried beans. Okay, after beans, when they come out of the ground, if you eat, peas in a pod, you can eat them, they're edible raw. But most of us never see beans like that. Most of us see beans after they've been dried out to preserve them so that they don't spoil. Okay, and those are not edible raw. So he says this. So the whole fact that there's such a discussion in the poskim it's along the lines of what the Aruch is saying is that the food has become. It used to be edible raw. It didn't need Bishul Yisroel, and now it became not edible raw. It became changed in a way, just like in our case, the cooking that the guy did can be undone and it became back to raw again. Or the cooking that the Yid did could be undone, it could become back to being raw again. And whatever happened to Bishul Akum and Bishul Yisroel was undone, it started again from scratch. If we take a food that was cooked, that was edible raw, and we make it not edible raw, then that food now all of a sudden needs Bishul Yisroel. Now it happens to be that beans don't need it for a different reason, because they're not oil Shulchan. But the fact that there's a discussion about it is because you have to view the food as it is in the form that it's in now. It's something we're going to see a little bit more about in a couple of halachas, about salted foods. We'll see that salted fish in a few halachas. But you look at the food as it is now. Right now, this food is not edible raw, even though it once was. If this food right now is not edible raw,
can you moisten it up and make it be edible?
No, you can't. Just try it.
Is that possible?
No. I don't know if it's every bean. If you take most beans and you soak them, they're not going to be edible. They're still going to be hard as well. You still can't eat them. They still need cooking. But even though when you took it off the ground, you could eat it. Okay, I'm assuming that's correct. It sounds right to me. The beans that we've seen, seem edible when they come off the ground. Unless that might be wrong in the Metzias, but the Svara he's saying is sort of an extension of what the Beis Yosef is saying. We have to look at the thing as it is today. The fact that there was a time that it was different,
It's a chiddush.
it is a chiddush. No, it is because you might argue and say a food that's edible raw, I don't gain anything from what the guy did because I could have eaten it raw myself anyhow. The fact that it temporarily was not edible raw doesn't mean anything to me. It's not exactly the same as the African circle.
Does it make a difference if the guy dried it out? What if the Jew dried it out and made it unedible? Does it make a difference who dried it out?
It shouldn't make a difference. So what I'm saying is, if he cooks me up a pot of beans, so I say, did I gain something from what he did to me? So he said, the Chalkas Binyamin is saying is, I did gain something from him. I used to have an inedible thing, and he made it edible, so I gained something from it, so it needs to be so. You could argue that I didn't get anything because it used to be fully edible. And for a while it wasn't a big deal, but really, I didn't get anything because I could have eaten this. Maybe that's what he wants to say.